Hi everyone, welcome to part 5 of my little adventure in putting my live performance rig together, first for the Rogue Festival and then live performances beyond that. This has been quite an adventure. In the first 4 parts I've discussed all of the various trials and tribulations I've had in getting all of this to work. It all comes down to the communication between the various devices. I need some means of having this keyboard connected to the computer and pulling sounds off the computer. This is another pipe organ emulator, and I need all of that to go into various effects processors. I need all of these things to change instantly at the push of a button so that I can go from one soundscape to the next so that the music flows nice and fluidly. But the fact is, it's all possible thanks to a system called MIDI. MIDI stands for Musical Instrument Digital Interface, and it is a computer protocol that was designed in the early 1980s and it is still used to this day. Can you think of anything else that's on your computer that was designed in the 1980s and you are still using it? But MIDI was so well thought out, is so effective, is so simple and easy to use that it's been around for 40 years and it's not going anywhere. There really isn't a lot of incentive to really update it to MIDI 2.0 or whatever. It just works. It does exactly what we need it to do. Now, when I was in high school, we were in the pre-MIDI era, and it just never occurred to me that I could have my various keyboards and equipment communicating with each other. Each keyboard did its thing. It had an audio output. I put it in a mixer, and then I sent it on out to the house system so people could dance. Now I can tell this keyboard to be the master controller, and I can tell it what I want the various soundscapes to be. I can tell it to change this, change that, change this over here, and boom, with the push of a foot switch it all takes place. The only limitation I have is financial. I think everybody's experiencing money tightness these days. And it's a matter of me putting it together with stuff I already have and not having to run down to the music store and buy a bunch of expensive equipment. Certainly if I had unlimited funds, I'd just go down to a local music store, get everything I need, and this would be even easier. But there was a time, of course, when none of this had been even thought of, were it not for a guy named Don Lewis. Now, I met Don Lewis in 2014. We both worked for the Rogers Organ Company, and at that point I knew him to be a really wonderful guy and a tremendous musician. And we spent a few mornings at breakfast during a conference talking to each other, and it was a delightful time. I didn't have any idea how important Don Lewis was to the history of electronic music until I saw this. This is a documentary called The Ballad of Don Lewis, and there's a rework of this documentary that's going to be featured on PBS during the month of February. Don created in the 1970s a rig, kind of like this, only more so, that was built to be a custom thing for him to play his music on. The difference was that none of this stuff back then was intended to talk to each other. So he had a Hammond organ and a Passetta keyboard and various synthesizers, and he needed them all to work seamlessly together. Well, no such idea had been worked out, and MIDI was a fantasy for the future. So Don had to use his electrical engineering skills and the help of others to develop all of these custom circuits to translate the information from the Hammond organ to go over to the ARP synthesizers and to communicate with the Roland equipment. And it was an amazing, amazing accomplishment. And when he finally finished his rig, it was called Leo, the Live Electronic Orchestra. And Don performed all over the place with Leo, and it was an amazing accomplishment, especially since, ARP didn't think to communicate with Oberheim, and Roland certainly never thought about communicating with Hammond. but Don somehow made it all work, and it's documented in the film Ballad of Don Lewis, and will be shown on PBS. Leo was such an important accomplishment that Leo itself is on display at the Museum of Making Music down in Southern California. I'll leave a link to that also in the video description. So as I go through trying to make my rig work, which is a super easy thing to do compared to what Don did back in the 70s, my hat's off to Don for paving the way, as it were. Now, sadly, Don passed away this past November, and I wished I had had more time to get to know him even better. During the few years that we knew of each other, Don was very generous with his time with me. On a couple of days we spent over 6 hours talking, and I recorded the whole thing. And what a sweet, sweet guy, and I will miss him dearly. Don paved the way for MIDI, and MIDI makes all of this possible. So, thanks, Don.